Alaikum and welcome everybody to this launch event. Launch events happen all the time, but a launch event focused on a note that addresses property tax is not common, but at the same time it's extremely needed, simply because. Taxing property is a key instrument, not just for raising revenues to provide services, but also in designing the urban areas that you need to develop. Formalizing properties and taxation of properties and the kind of services that those properties get is a critical way for properties to become valuable, transactable assets. And that in turn makes them fundamental to the way cities develop and grow. So this is a very important instrument of public policy. And I'm delighted that we have with us two extraordinarily well-versed speakers to talk about the note. Hasaan Khawar, who before became a manager of this assignment in KP. He's been a consultant and advising provincial governments, federal government, governments overseas, and knows these issues extremely well. And Ali Cheema, what can I say about Ali Cheema? He's one of our wisest economists. His advice, his wisdom is sought after in all kinds of policy circles. And he, of course, is a leading academic of the country. So with these brief introductions, let me thank Mr. Ghazan Jamal for taking out the time to provide his patronage to this important launch. We look forward to his comments after Hasaan and Ali have spoken. And with that, let me invite Hasaan to say a few words on the report and the launch event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. Such a pleasure to be able to launch this policy note. I am speaking today on behalf of SEED, which is a program funded by UK government, Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO. The SEED is a program which is focused on improved economic and urban planning in KP. And the property tax is very important to us because of two reasons. One, we are geared towards mobilizing investment, private investment, and also generating more public investment. And when we talk about generating public investment, of course, fiscal space is a key consideration, and property tax remains one of the most undercapitalized sources of revenue across Pakistan, but more specifically in KP. So I think that's one reason. The second is that property tax UIPT remains a very important lever to be able to influence urban policy. And that's something also that is very important to SEED in this program. And that's why UIPT seemed like the right fit to work on. And then we have someone like Ghazan Jamal, who had been working in this area, and this is also very close to him. So there is a very strong government demand to reform the UIPT regime, how it's implemented, how it's spent, how it's allocated. So from that perspective, it was very important. And when we looked into this area, who better than Dr. Ali Cheema and CDPR and IGC could have been to steer this exercise. So I'm very glad that we could claim some time for Dr. Cheema to write this policy note, to look into this area. And we do hope that this is just the first step on this journey. And after the launch of this event, Mr. Ghazan Jamal and Government of KP will be picking up some of these recommendations and will be taking them forward. And SEED and FCDO, I believe, will be very happy to support some of these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you for this context to the report. Ali, I've looked through the contents page of the report and the first few pages summarizing some of the main recommendations. And I can see that this covers a whole range of issues from the rates issue to actually, as you know, property tax structures in Punjab, especially where you've worked and I worked, are riddled with exemptions. You can have a very good rate structure, but then you just puncture the whole system with all kinds of exemptions. And then going beyond exemptions, the gap between the potential tax revenue, even after allowing for exemptions, and what is actually delivered to the government is substantial. And there's a huge sort of incentives issue to get the revenues flowing into the government. So there's a whole range of issues, and I can see that your report, the report touches on all of them. It'd be fantastic to hear from you directly, since you know these issues so well.
Thank you, Ijaz. I'd like to just begin by saying that, sort of given recent events in Peshawar, I just wanted to kind of say that our hearts go out to our fellow citizens in Peshawar and KP, and I realize this is an extremely challenging time for people there. But Ghazan sort of felt it was important still to carry on, so we're here. Let me kind of just give a quick context to what the note is about and what I'm going to do today. So the note was basically a note which was looking at existing evidence from comparable contexts, Punjab in particular, where there's been a lot of work done by numerous people, in particular by Asim Khaja, Nan Khan, and Ben Olkin on the property tax, and there's been policy work as well. There's also been a lot of institutional work supported by the World Bank and also led by the government of Punjab. But then other contexts with a lot of work in Africa and so on to see how that evidence can inform the strategic direction of thinking around policy reform. So this is not a in-depth report about the diagnostics of what is going wrong, but the big picture about what sort of seems to be the challenges and what is the way to move forward. So the report itself kind of drew on kind of basic policy overview, looking at the evidence, seeing where the challenges exist. So what I'm going to do today is kind of present the kind of big picture pathway to policy thinking in KP, give a proposed framework, but I am also going to draw on a recent pilot survey that the government of, Ghazan's kind of team led in KP, and we supported them. It's a very small pilot. It's about 150 respondents in Peshawar. Basically, I don't want to place a lot of I want the evidence to be looked at as indicative, but it kind of matches a lot of the evidence from Punjab. So rather than my presenting the more robust evidence from Punjab, which draws on Ben and Asim and Adnan's work, I felt that kind of presenting the KP evidence might be important. I have a few slides actually. If the host can enable my screen sharing, it may be kind of good for me to just kind of run you through the slides. Is that kind of possible? Or I can just like talk you through it.
Dr. Cheema, you will have the screen sharing option at your end.
No, but somebody has to actually enable it. So the administrator, whoever has the link, has to enable me to share the screen, has to give me rights. Is that possible, or shall I just like walk people through?
Kindly please start walking people through. Let me figure it out along the way.
Okay, so basically, as Hassan has kind of mentioned, the big sort of overarching context in which the report must be read is the urban growth that is happening in KP. So KP is one of the most, in terms of administrative data, it's the least urbanized province. It's one of the least urbanized provinces in Pakistan. But that said, there are two important stylized facts to keep in mind. One is that actually urban growth has been pretty high. So urban areas have been growing at about 3 percentage points per annum, basically between 97 and 2017, between the two census periods. But more importantly than that, a number of urban agglomerations have actually opened up in KP. And I have a kind of nice slide about kind of shares. So if you look at Peshawar district, it's about half of it is kind of urban. But then you have districts like Swat, Kohat, Diyai Khan, Naushera, Abtabad, Hangu Mardan with sizable urban agglomerations. And if you look at central KP, which is the belt, the Peshawar Valley, then that's fairly urbanized. And when we look at these kind of urbanizing figures or figures about urbanization, I can actually share this. We have to kind of keep in mind that these are administrative, our definition in the census is an administrative definition. So lived definition would suggest much higher rates of urbanization. Now, the bigger challenge with this urbanization is, and these are there, here I'm drawing on recent work by Ghazala Mansouri and the Asian Development Bank, that if you look at urban municipal services, you see pretty stark deficits. So, less than 50% of urban citizens in KP have access to piped water with regular flows. Sewage waste generated by 80% of these citizens flow in open drains. 70% of municipal solid waste is not connected. So these are kind of fairly serious deficits. And we know that as urban agglomerations go, densification causes its demons, and kind of stress on municipal services and resultant public health effects and nutritional effects and so on, and human capital effects flow from these. Now, for our purpose, the kind of bigger challenge, and here I want to kind of stop a moment and just say all this work that I've done is with Ali Abbas, who's a co-author, and he's right now at Cornell. And this is the starting point for Ali and my work, which is really to look at, what are the financing options? And there, overall in Pakistan, but also in KP, we see big deficits. So this figure, although it's a bit dated, it's for comparability purposes, it's 2016 data, but it's comparing per capita collection of property tax in Punjab, KP, and cities, the biggest cities in Punjab and KP with Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, and Chennai. And you can see that, these are fairly large differences. So clearly a very important tool for municipal financing, which is property taxes, is facing a big challenge. And the question is basically, why is it facing those challenges? So I want to turn now to this survey that I talked about. And we start with the simplest thing, which is a question about what people say are the reasons why they're reluctant to pay taxes. And the kind of standard assumption basically that is there is that, basically it's high rates or it's lack of enforceability. But what this data is showing, and it's fairly consistent with the Khaja et al.'s work in Punjab, is that there is a big challenge about seeing benefits. So a very large proportion of people say that they don't pay taxes because they don't see benefits in terms of payment of taxation, or because taxes are not spent efficiently, basically. And this kind of is consistent with the two types of taxpayers that matter for property taxes, which are commercial and residential. But in specific terms, we also asked people what percentage of property taxes that they pay are spent on services. And you can see a very large proportion of respondents basically say less than 40%, right? But if you change the question and you ask them what proportion is spent on services that they prefer, more than half say less than 20%, right? So the property tax problem is just not about a problem of tax collection. It's also a problem of actually providing services effectively. And the reason I'm pointing this out, and I'm going to point out a few other challenges, is that this actually fact should make us re-envision the way we think about the kind of strategic space for interventions in property taxes, and I'm going to come back to that. Along with that, the second big challenge that comes up, which comes about when you disaggregate the respondents into residential and commercial, the dark blue are residential and the dark blue are commercial and the light blue are residential, that you can see there's a big difference in responses in terms of tax rates being too high. So commercial respondents, a very large proportion say that these are very high, and actually residential respondents say no. For them, the benefit taxation is the big issue. And this kind of tells us that there's a challenge of policy, because the challenge of policy is actually related to differential taxation, which is, you know, a legacy of the British system, where we tax land use or property use in differential ways. The two main differences in the policy framework are between residential and commercial taxpayers, with commercial property holders being subject to higher liabilities, and between self-owned and rented properties. So these are kind of differences within the policy framework that we see. And I'm going to also come back to the question of valuation. The third thing, which is related to valuation, is, and this is very KP specific, that the KP system of valuation actually uses area principally as the base for valuing properties. So it is progressive in area, but it is not progressive in value. So, you know, plots of similar sizes in different parts of the city having different values will be subject to the same taxation, more or less. And again, from the survey, what we are seeing is that people actually feel that a tax on value is fairer than a tax on area. And I haven't included those questions, but a pure tax on area is perceived as regressive, right? So both these things give us two pillars for our thinking. The first is that if we have to do strategic thinking, we have to strengthen the benefit linkage. If we are to create voluntary compliance in the system or develop norms of compliance within the tax system. And the second is that we have to think about the valuation system and rejig it to ensure that it's not perceived to be regressive, and it matches notions of fairness that taxpayers have. And we also have to look at this question of differential taxation. The third big thing, which I think is a very KP specific problem, is basically the narrow base. So Punjab has kind of broadened the base. The big thing, and you already have a clue of that from this earlier per capita tax figure that I showed you, that you can see that in per capita terms, Peshawar actually doesn't do worse than a place. I mean, it's marginally doing worse than a place like Lahore, but urban KP overall does really, really badly. And the reason that this is the case is basically because 70% of the property taxes in KP are collected from Peshawar. And our colleagues at the excise department then tell us that even within Peshawar, the base is really narrow. And at the base of this is really that the systems that are there simply are sort of not modern enough to ensure the broadening of the base. So, you know, you have tax registers which are maintained in an analog form. you have no digitization of registration, you have no documentation of properties that can be used for the purposes of registration, broadening, and also basically you don't have the digitization that can ensure that you can move towards different methodologies of valuation. Now, of course, all these things together create like a bind. If you have a narrow base, then you're going to tax that base at a very, very high rate and probably unfairly. So that's going to affect perceptions of fairness, and that itself might have implications for voluntary compliance. So if we just take these three areas, the kind of weak benefit link, the perceived kind of normative unfairness, and the narrow base, how would this kind of match with the traditional ways of thinking about property tax enforcement? And usually when we think about reforms, we think about reforms in policy areas like exemptions. Ijaz, you spoke a lot about it. I'm actually not going to talk that much about it. And basically you think about valuation methodologies, and then you think about enforcement. But we actually think that, in this kind of framework of strategic thinking around reforms, you have to bring in what we call the benefit link, right? Or another way to think about it is that you have to think about taxpayer morale and voluntary compliance. If you leave this apart and you think that all you need to do is strengthen enforcement, that is not going to work given the weaknesses in KP's current capacity. And the third big thing for us is that you have to strengthen capacity, and I'm going to make some specific comments, and I've just 2 more slides left, and then I'm going to stop. So basically, in terms of valuation, we think that there is a real requirement or need to move away from the area-based system to start thinking about a system built around property value. We don't think a full-blown property value taxation system can happen because of the lack of information and databases, but you could move towards what's called an area-based or a point-based system that uses property values in different parts of the city to create some progressivity in the liability, right? And the reason we think value is important is because you want to use valuation methodologies to capture property value increases that come from public investments that cities make. So if cities are investing efficiently, then that should lead to property valuation, and a part of that gain should be recouped by the city. And that in some sense embeds the benefit link. If you break this link, if there's no gain of the city from the increase in value coming from public investments, then that's going to disincentivize city managers. But I'm also going to talk about the governance of cities being broken, that may not be sufficient. We may have to think about the architecture of governance. The second thing is that we looked at exemptions. I haven't gone into it. There's a bit in the report. What we feel is that they're not tied to any normative principles. So we think that tying exemptions to ability to pay, we think based on income in some sense, may be a way forward. But certainly it has to be embedded within some well-defined normative framework or fairness framework that's acceptable to the citizens of KP. In terms of broadening the base, we think given the current capacity levels at KP, the first port of call would be to do the capacity interventions that Punjab has done. So the biggest one would be creating a database of properties and property characteristics, geocoding it, and then digitizing that and integrating it with the current property registers, which would need to be digitized. We also think that it's worth looking at HR incentives. There's already excellent work out there in Punjab that those create big returns. So making transfers performance-based and then designing those performance incentive systems can also bring in the HR effort that will be required. We actually think that benefit might be bigger in KP than in Punjab, because the current system, the kind of sort of digital system or the IT-based system is so weak that actually the HR incentives will be crucial, even onboarding or exporting yourselves to the new system. We also think that there are kind of tax facilitation measures, which were part of capacity interventions in Punjab, which could be replicated. And in fact, you could go further. So the broadening the base, the critical piece in that is going to be the information and data systems. In terms of the valuation, it's moving away from a regressive area-based system into some kind of either equal burden system or a progressive system. We need to learn more about it. And the third thing to me, which is extremely important, is to create benefit linkages. And I think that we need to think of this problem at two levels, basically. The first level is at the architecture of city governance. Right now, the city is broken. There isn't a unified governance system of the city. Parts of the cities or towns belong to local governments, part are governed by provincial authorities, or when it comes to services. So you kind of have the citizen dealing with multiple agencies. It becomes like a multiple agency problem, and kind of creating a framework for unified governance, and then allowing those administrative institutions or elected institutions to actually gain from the increase in value their investment creates at the higher level seems to be the most important path. That's going to be a kind of rocky path also, because that will require a more radical institutional reform. But I think that is important, particularly since the local government reform is so big on this government's radar. But we think that there are other basically instruments that we can think about, which, kind of public finance theory, sort of the kind of traditional route would sort of not be comfortable with, but we think about earmarking. So sort of making commitments to spend parts of what you're collecting in particular areas back in those areas. We don't think that that's about just giving that money back to the town at the city level. That's too big. But you have neighborhood councils, and there may be some way to think about a framework to give the neighborhood councils and citizens there some stake, because that would make the benefit link more visual. You could sort of more tractable for people. We certainly think that information disclosures through citizen information systems and audit systems about how money that is raised through this taxation is being spent would give people actually stakes. The literature on the information alone is mixed. Earmarking seems to be more promising. But earmarking could be done in a passive way, where we just solicit voice and then program accordingly. Or it could be more deliberated through institutions of participatory budgeting. Again, you have an institutional unit present, which would be the neighborhood councils. And if that capacity could be created there to voice these things, and to inform spends, at least for a proportion of what's being contributed, would be a way to actually strengthen the benefit link. So the three big directions for us are policy reforms around valuation and exemptions, capacity investments with the view of broadening kept in mind. And by the way, with the view of broadening, my own view would be keeping tax rates low to bring more people into the net. But the third thing is actually prioritizing on strengthening voluntary compliance. So let me stop there, and I'm happy to join the discussion.
Thank you, Ali. This has been an excellent review of the main features of property tax reform. All three areas are critical areas, and I think your report touches on all of those in a way that is relevant to KP. the earlier work on Punjab has a fair degree of relevance, and I think you have referred to that. We can take some questions at this stage, or we can ask Ghazan to say his few words, and then take questions at the end of that. Either way, we could go. Ghazan, do you have a preference?
I'm okay either way.
Okay, so then let me invite you, Ghazan, to say a few remarks, and then we can take questions.
I'm not going to take a lot of time. Thank you, Dr. Nabi. Let me begin by, first of all, thanking SEED, CDPR, IGC, especially Dr. Cheema and Ali Abbas for the amazing work they've done in preparing this report. Dr. Cheema has kind of given a very good overview of what exactly the report covers. From the KP side, basically our thinking behind this was that, like Dr. Cheema mentioned, when we started work around 6-7 months ago now, when I took charge of this department, it was pretty clear that we're pretty far behind the reforms that have happened in Punjab and in other parts of the country, let alone globally in this area. And so we thought it would be naive of us to kind of try and reinvent the wheel again. There's some really good work that IGC and CDPR and Dr. Ali and all have done in Lahore and in Punjab and other areas. And it was, the whole idea was to let us try and see, evaluate our own KP system, where we're at, see what we can just adapt of what's worked in the rest of the country and just kind of adapt that into our own systems. And then along with that, kind of see what further improvements or what mistakes or things or kind of lessons learned from other reforms that have happened, we can pick those up and kind of bring them in our systems. And just to give a brief overview, it comes at the right time because we've already done the groundwork in terms of identifying, creating projects, in terms of doing GIS maps, identifying potential partners in terms of automation and digitization. But I'll be very frank in saying the department itself doesn't have the capacity to kind of even ask the right questions, and then let alone kind of guide and work through the roadmap of how to implement it. And then along with that, some of these reforms in terms of GIS maps that happen, they take a couple of years if you want to do them properly. And so the whole idea is we can't wait for then. There are improvements, especially like Dr. Cheema mentioned, in terms of where HR is concerned. There are improvements in the immediate term that we can do that can show results. And a brief example of that is, and we've kind of honed into the to see the importance of property tax in the excise department. On our part, what we've done this year is we used to collect 8 different taxes. We've limited it to 4 now. We further, if need be, are looking to further bring it down, because we want taxes like property tax, where the real potential is and which actually pays for our municipal services, to kind of allow our departments and our offices to kind of concentrate on this. And we've seen a huge improvement there. We've seen in the first quarter, we've seen something like a 200% increase in property tax collection. And that's basically come from concentrating on the HR side of things. But I still believe that we're far short of the real benefits or the real potential that is there. And the numbers and everything talks about that. And so the whole idea of this report was to kind of build that roadmap and then help. And then we're hoping that through SEED, through CDPR, and through IGC, we can engage these researchers who've done brilliant work in Punjab to help us in KP as well, to kind of reach that potential. And so I look forward to further collaborations on this as well.
Thank you, Ghazan. Before I conclude, there is one dimension of property tax reform that we often don't emphasize sufficiently, which is that property makes a very important capital base in societies. And transactable properties, properties in which you can use as assets for borrowing and for investment, are at the heart of the investment climate in most countries. And what makes properties either become pools of capital or frozen assets is this broken down system of valuation, revenues, and the services. Because it's when these three are working together, properties really acquire the value that they should, and become mobile, become assets that can be used for investment purposes. And I think that's whole dimension also opens up if we address the kinds of issues that Ali talked about and that you have in mind, and deepening the capital market in KP to finance KP's overall growth has to be an extremely important factor. So let me just conclude with that, and wish you the best with this effort. The sector that's grown the fastest in countries like Pakistan is the property sector. And I think the sooner we put that sector to work, both in making the capital base for investments, but also as a base for improving urban living, I think that'll be fantastic. So I wish you the best of luck with that. And let me conclude with our prayers and our thoughts for the families who have suffered as a result of the recent incidents in Peshawar, and let us hope and pray that we are rid of this menace. And I'm sure improving the services in the city will contribute to that in the long term. So with that, let me bring this to close. Thank you very much.